Three scams of the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic was made possible by three scams. First, the non-existent SARS-CoV-2 virus. Second, the false mortality forecast presented by Ferguson. And third, the use of a PCR test to detect the SARS virus. Today, all the scams have been exposed, and we can reveal who committed them, how, and when. Scam number 1. The non-existent SARS-CoV-2 virus. The hoax surrounding the isolation of the SARS virus unfolded as follows. On December 30, 2019, specialists at the Beijing Medical Laboratory announced the discovery of a new virus, SARS-CoV-2, which is believed to cause COVID-19. On January 9, 2020, the World Health Organization confirmed China's information about the discovery of a new virus, classifying it as a coronavirus. On January 10, the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention released the genetic sequence of the SARS virus, which was then shared worldwide. On January 30th, the World Health Organization declared the China virus a public health emergency of international concern. Finally, on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization officially classified the spread of COVID-19 as a pandemic. The deception was exposed a year later. In January 2021, Dr. Wu Zunyu, chief epidemiologist at the Chinese Center for Disease Control, admitted in an interview with an NBC reporter that Chinese scientists had failed to isolate the SARS virus. Quote, "They didn't isolate the virus, that is the issue. I suspect it's not coming from what we originally thought." End of quote. Europe's leading scientific organization, the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin, also hasn't isolated the SARS virus. The authors of an article in the newspaper Off Guardian note, quote, "Even the Robert Koch Institute and other health authorities cannot present decisive proof that a new virus named SARS-CoV-2 is haunting us. This alone turns the talk of dangerous viral mutations into irresponsible fear-mongering and the so-called SARS-CoV-2 PCR tests definitely into a worthless venture." End of quote. On December 31, 2020, German entrepreneur Samuel Eckert offered scientists a €230,000 prize for a publication scientifically proving the isolation of the SARS virus. None of the scientists responded to Eckert's offer. On June 6, 2020, researchers from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, published a paper in the journal Emerging Infectious Diseases claiming to have isolated the virus. After reviewing the publication, California physician Thomas Cowan called it scientific fraud. In an article dated October 15, 2020, Cowan wrote, quote, "Rather than having isolated the virus and sequencing the genome from end to end, that the CDC designed 37 pairs. They then add that information into a computer and program it to recreate the unicorn, and they then claim this computer recreation is the real unicorn. To me, this computer generation step constitutes scientific fraud." End of quote. Further confirmation of the questionable nature of virus isolation was provided by a CDC document on the use of PCR tests published in July 2021. Page 41 of the document states, quote, "No quantified virus isolates were available for CDC use at the time the test was developed and this study conducted." End of quote. This formulation allows us to draw an important conclusion. A year after CDC specialists announced the isolation of the SARS virus, the CDC itself admitted that it does not have an isolated strain of this virus. The final nail in the coffin of the SARS virus isolate was driven by Dr. Michael Lauer of the Robert Koch Institute in Berlin. On September 4, 2020, in response to an Off Guardian request, Dr. Lauer wrote, quote, "I am not aware of a paper which purified isolated SARS-CoV-2." End of quote. Dr. Lauer's response indicates that he did not find the CDC's work scientifically credible. Thus, the double lie of Chinese scientists that they isolated the SARS virus and that this virus is the cause of COVID-19 was supported by World Health Organization Director General Ghebreyesus and used to declare a pandemic. The restrictions that countries were forced to impose due to the pandemic led to a global socio-economic catastrophe. The fact that Tedros Ghebreyesus still heads the World Health Organization is a testament to the level of corruption within the United Nations. Scam number 2. Neil Ferguson's false mortality forecast. The introduction of quarantine measures that led to the collapse of the global economy was a consequence of the catastrophic Report Number 9 by Professor Neil Ferguson, head of the Center for Infectious Disease Analysis at Imperial College London. In March 2020, Imperial College epidemiologists led by Ferguson sent the US and UK governments a dire forecast of potential coronavirus deaths. According to their calculations, between April and July 510,000 people would die in the United Kingdom and 2,200,000 in the United States. To prevent disaster, Ferguson recommended quarantine measures, including home isolation, social distancing, and closure of educational institutions. The Ferguson report became a powerful pretext for imposing strict quarantine restrictions. Based on this report, Anthony Fauci, the chief medical advisor to the President of the United States, and the global media effectively forced President Donald Trump to declare a national emergency on March 13, 2020. Following the United States, quarantine measures were introduced in Spain, France, Israel, Germany, India, Great Britain, and Canada. On March 25, after most countries in Europe and America had already announced lockdowns, Ferguson lowered his death toll forecast by an order of magnitude. For the United Kingdom, 20,000 deaths, and for the United States, 200,000 deaths. Ferguson and his team at Imperial College have long been known for their false predictions. In 2002, Ferguson predicted 150,000 deaths in the United Kingdom from mad cow disease. In 2005, he predicted 200 million deaths from bird flu worldwide. In 2009, Ferguson predicted 65,000 deaths in the United Kingdom from swine flu. None of these predictions came close to being confirmed, yet they nonetheless caused significant economic damage. Ferguson's group works closely with the World Health Organization. Ferguson himself leads a consortium on vaccine impact modeling, sponsored by the Gates Foundation. Bill Gates began investing in Ferguson's projects after the pathological unreliability of his forecasts became known. By 2018, the Gates Foundation had invested $185 million in Ferguson's group. These facts have led some researchers to suggest that Ferguson is a scientific mercenary. In May 2020, Professor Neil Ferguson resigned. To avoid unwanted questions, the official reason given for his resignation was a violation of quarantine regulations. Scam number 3. Using a PCR test to detect the SARS virus. This test was invented in 1983 by American biochemist Kary Mullis. In an interview with Spin magazine in 1992, Mullis said, quote, "PCR made it easier to see that certain people are infected with human immunodeficiency viruses." End of quote. Thus, the PCR test was originally developed to detect HIV infection, not to detect the SARS virus. How does a PCR test work? Samples containing DNA fragments are taken from a person and then replicated, meaning their quantity is multiplied. Replication occurs cyclically. Each cycle doubles the amount of genetic material. The number of cycles required for identification is called the cycle threshold. The more cycles, the higher the probability of a positive result. In other words, a positive PCR test result can be achieved by increasing the number of cycles. In January 2020, German physician Christian Drosten developed a technology for using a PCR test to detect the SARS virus. However, Drosten did not have the virus itself to test his method. His approach was purely theoretical. In violation of scientific standards, the World Health Organization adopted Drosten's untested technology as the diagnostic protocol for COVID-19. On December 14, 2020, the World Health Organization was forced to acknowledge that PCR tests could produce false positive results. This was due to an inflated replication rate. Simply put, someone ordered health ministries around the world to increase the number of testing cycles in order to artificially inflate the number of positive test results. In this regard, World Health Organization has called on countries to lower cycle thresholds for PCR testing to prevent false positive results. Israel is a prime example of PCR test results being manipulated. In July 2020, the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Health, Professor Itamar Grotto, stated that 9 out of 10 tests yield false positive results, making them practically pointless. A study by a group of 22 world-class scientists, including Mike Yaden, former vice president of Pfizer, demonstrated the inadequacy of the Corman-Drosten protocol for detecting SARS virus using PCR testing. The protocol's creators did not have access to the virus itself and relied on theoretical assumptions. Christian Drosten himself confirmed this in his article. Drosten's fraud had more serious consequences for him than for Ghebreyesus and Ferguson. The German public discovered that the University of Frankfurt, where Drosten defended his doctorate in 2003, did not have a single copy of his dissertation. When questioned by Dr. Markus Kubacher, an expert on scientific fraud, a university spokesperson said the copies had been damaged in a flood. It is also surprising that the German National Library's catalog of all university publications does not contain any entries for Christian Drosten during the period in question. In December 2020, Dr. Kubacher filed a lawsuit regarding the deposit copies of Drosten's dissertation and their alleged storage in excessively humid conditions. In addition, Dr. Rainer Filmick filed a claim for damages against Drosten on behalf of one of his clients who suffered financial losses as a result of anti-coronavirus measures. Conclusion: Tedros Ghebreyesus, Niall Ferguson, and Christian Drosten are far from the main figures in the hoax dubbed the COVID-19 pandemic. However, they will help us find those who orchestrated it. Below is a short list of the individuals and organizations involved. Bill Gates. In 2016, Bill Gates, the World Health Organization's largest private financial backer, appointed Ethiopian Marxist Tedros Ghebreyesus to head the Global Fund for Children's Rights. The following year, in 2017, Gates facilitated Ghebreyesus's promotion to the post of World Health Organization Director General. Following this appointment, the World Health Organization became financially and administratively dependent on Gates. The Good Club, or Malthusian billionaires. Bill Gates is a member of the Good Club, an organization founded in 2009 by American Malthusian billionaires to unite efforts to reduce population and birth rates. Members of the club include David Rockefeller Jr., Warren Buffett, George Soros, Michael Bloomberg, and Ted Turner. David Rockefeller Jr. In 2010, Rockefeller funded the development of scenarios for the future development. One of them, the lockstep scenario, predicts the onset of a pandemic that will kill 8 million people and describes the introduction of strict government controls and authoritarian governance methods to combat the pandemic. Many elements of this scenario were subsequently realized during the COVID-19 pandemic. Fabian Society, Imperial College London, where Neil Ferguson is a fellow, was founded in 1907 by Sidney Webb, one of the founders and leading ideologists of the Fabian Society. Fabianism is an offshoot of Reformed Marxism. In his book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, writer Ion Ratiu convincingly showed how, using the tactics of socialist reform, the Fabian Society gradually establishes a totalitarian social order designed to perpetuate the power of the super-rich international elite. A similar model of society is described in the novel 1984 by former Fabian Society member George Orwell. The fraudulent nature of the Fabian Society is reflected in its emblem, which depicts a wolf in sheep's clothing. The public political forces of the Fabian Society are the Labour Party of the United Kingdom and the Socialist International. King Charles III. In June 2020, Prince Charles participated in a World Economic Forum video conference. In his speech, he called for using the pandemic as a stage in humanity's transition to the sustainable development model adopted by the UN in 2015. The essence of this model is the virtual halting of human development in order to achieve balance with nature. It is noteworthy that Charles III heads the British branch of the World Wildlife Fund, the highest-ranking environmental organization, the Council for Inclusive Capitalism with the Vatican. The revelation of the key forces behind the pandemic occurred on December 8, 2020, the day the Vatican's Council for Inclusive Capitalism was established. The initiators of this event were Pope Francis, Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, appointed to lead the council on behalf of the Vatican, and the so-called guardians, which include the heads of international organizations, foundations, banks, and corporations. What is inclusive capitalism? In his book The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, writer Ion Ratiu exposed the Aesopian language of British socialists, noting that the expression inclusive capitalism is a disguise for the term socialism. Specifically, he wrote, quote, Liam Byrne, an employee of N.M. Rothschild & Sons and a member of the Fabian Society, is a leading proponent of corporate-sponsored socialism, which he calls inclusive capitalism. End of quote. Pope Francis and the Jesuit Socialists. Pope Francis's support for socialist ideas stems from his membership in the Jesuit order. For their leftist views, the Jesuits are often called socialists in cassocks. Back in the 16th century, Jesuit Robert Bellarmine laid the foundations of the so-called liberation theology, the ideological basis for future social revolutions. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Jesuits established a network of agricultural communes in South America that utilized the free labor of Indians. This experience was later replicated in the Soviet Union in the form of the collective farm system. International financiers and industrialists. The appointment of Lynn Rothschild as head of the council was no accident. The British Rothschilds and other City of London bankers were long-time sponsors of the Fabian Society. They were later joined by Wall Street bankers, particularly the Rockefellers, and international industrialists. Rainer Filmick's investigation. A significant contribution to exposing the forces behind the pandemic was made by Dr. Rainer Filmick, press secretary of the Coronavirus Investigative Committee. An international legal team led by him conducted an investigation that resulted in a lawsuit filed in the Ontario Superior Court of Canada, challenging the legality of the COVID-19 pandemic and related coronavirus measures. According to the investigation, the following individuals and legal entities are among the accused: Pope Francis, the Holy See, Vatican City State, the Society of Jesus or Jesuits, Queen Elizabeth II, the Order of the Garter, the House of Windsor, the Global Vaccine Alliance, the World Health Organization, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Sufficient evidence has been collected for the COVID-19 pandemic trial. The organizers and perpetrators, the methods of fraud, and the scale of damage are known. The final step remains: the establishment of an international tribunal, which will hold those responsible accountable and ensure their punishment. A link to the article text with sources is provided below this video. Thank you for your attention.